What's going on, everybody? It's Matt Harmon here. A little solo thing off the top here because for pull back the curtain, production note, we recorded the bulk of this show with Sal Vetri before the Amari Cooper trade, but I wanted to jump back on and just give some quick thoughts that we're sticking up at the top of the podcast on Amari Cooper being traded to the Bills for a package of picks, pick swap that sends a third-round pick back to Cleveland in exchange for Amari Cooper services. If you've listened to this show, you know how I feel about the Buffalo Bills outside wide receiver room. I think that's one of the worst outside receiver rooms in the league, especially from a separation standpoint. Now, Cooper has not had a good year to start the season. A lot of it is drops for sure. He's had drop issues. There's no question about that. However, according to Fantasy Points data, they have a stat where it's uncatchable air yards due to inaccurate throws. Amari Cooper has 352 uncatchable air yards due to inaccurate throws this year. He has 676 total air yards on the season. That's 52.1% of his air yards have just been completely uncatchable. And by the way, Cooper knows that. You watch Amari Cooper play this year, he's very, very clearly knows what's up at the quarterback position. This is a guy who had a great end of his season last year with Joe Flacco under center. He knows that he can get the ball and he can win at the X receiver position. And he's got a quarterback right now who just over half the time is not even going to get him close. So I think Cooper will be a little bit more dialed in with the Buffalo Bills than he's been to start this year. He's kind of always been a hot and cold player, a little bit volatile as an individual player, but I think he's played the best ball of his career in his first 2 years with the Cleveland Browns. He moves on here after 6 games. I think it was a good move for both player and team. I think Cooper, from a fantasy football perspective, I don't think I'm going to be pushing him into like my top 20 wide receivers or anything like that, but I think he's going to give you some high-end production from a ceiling standpoint. That range of outcomes is going to be there. I think he's going to definitely be volatile. He's definitely going to continue to be rocky. This is a run-first team. They're going to remain a run-first team, but they'll be able to take real deal shots on outside routes against play action now because they have a guy who can separate. Cooper might be a declining player. I will give you that, but I think that he just fits so much what they need. We're definitely at enough already territory with Matt Collins, even if he scored the touchdown last night, on Monday night. It just is a trade that makes a lot of sense. I really like the move from Buffalo's standpoint. I like the move from Cleveland's standpoint. Look, they're going to need some rookie contracts here coming up soon in whatever the hell they're going to do after the Deshaun Watson era ends. They still have some capable guys there on the roster. Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, maybe some more Cedric Tillman as that X receiver now that Cooper's gone. These guys are fine. I'm not as high on Elijah Moore as I was obviously when he came into the league. And Jerry Jeudy, you guys know I've always been a little bit below consensus on Jerry Jeudy. Cedric Tillman I think is interesting as an X receiver, but there's not going to be any fantasy value in Cleveland as long as Deshaun Watson is doing what he's doing out there. So maybe if we get Jameis Winston, we can have a conversation about those guys. But for now, it's really not much to speak of in Cleveland's passing offense. And for Buffalo, obviously it's a stock down for basically everybody in that passing offense because they have a real deal target earner there now. So Cooper still probably maybe a volatile wide receiver 3, but a guy that you can now credibly play and chase the volume and chase the air yards and things like that. We'll see how long it takes him to get ramped up with the Buffalo Bills, but I do really like this trade. He gets a nice move for his future fantasy outlook and really just the Bills overall. This is good news for Josh Allen and anyone who has him in their fantasy team as well. So with that, we'll throw to the rest of the show, a packed show with Sal Vetri and Drake London join us as well. Let's get into it. It's Wednesday, October 16th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is our good friend, Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. I think we're at a good time in the season. It might be my favorite time of the season. Like right when the season starts, you're really excited, but we kind of have a sample of what these teams are. It's not just like 1 or 2 games now. We have 6 games. We know their tendencies in all different types of situations, and we can kind of start to take that forward into the rest of the year. So I love this time of the year.
It does feel like things are more stable, right? There are certainly things people are panicked about or results they're confused about, hoping for some clarity. There's still people kind of trying to still die on bad take hill from preseason stuff, take locks, things like that. That, of course, is still going on. But for the most part, yeah, we've accepted what the new reality of this season has brought us. And now we're just trying to make it through. I'm glad you said you're enjoying this part of the season, because I feel like everybody else in the fantasy space is just bummed out by constant injuries and things like that. But yeah, I do normally enjoy this part of the year.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, the injuries are still, yeah, you could say bummed out is the perfect word. Still hitting me, still hitting my fantasy teams. We're trying to just push those feelings deep down right now, right? Like I've done probably for most of my life, but here we are at this point in the season. I think it's at least exciting from what can happen. You look at this past week, tons of rookie running backs are starting to emerge to kind of replace some of those injured players. So yeah, I think we're getting some positives at least out of this week.
Yeah, I'm glad you're focused on the positives because on Friday night, my wife and I are members of a wine bar in town here in Virginia Beach, Tinto in Strawbridge. By the way, shout out, great place. Love it. Absolutely fantastic. The owner's husband, shout out to Leo, is a big fantasy football player, big fan of football and stuff like that. He and I probably had at this wine dinner at the place on Friday, probably I would say we maybe had a few beverages at this point, but probably had a good 15-minute conversation about how the Nico Collins injury has ruined our respective lives. So that's where I'm at. I'm glad you're a little bit more positive here, Sal Vetri. So bringing that to the table here. Good job on you. It's going to be a big show here today. We have obviously a lot of stuff to cover. The Wednesday data dump. We have some news to cover off the top. We will also be joined or at least I'll be joined at the back half of the show, or the back part of the show, by Falcons wide receiver Drake London. So that's going to be pretty electric. But let's get into that news. As I mentioned, we got a big thing to talk about here this morning, Sal Vetri. Davante Adams traded to the New York Jets for a conditional third-round draft pick. According to Adam Schefter, the trade condition here is that conditional third-rounder from the Jets going to the Raiders will become a second if any of the following things happen, according to Schefter's source. Adams must be a first or second team AP All-Pro. He must also be on the active roster for the AFC Championship or Super Bowl. I don't necessarily think that either of those things are going to happen, but I could be wrong about the All-Pro stuff because a lot of that could be legacy things. So before we go to talk about the Raiders, how does this impact the Jets? What's the fantasy fallout from this move?
Yeah, I mean, finally, we get a game from Garrett Wilson last night where he's operating in space. He's picking up massive explosive plays, yards after the catch. Everything's looking great. And not even 12 hours later, it just plummets his fantasy value, in my opinion. Now, that's all relative, right? It's all, He was a top 12 pick for most people, maybe even a top 10 in your fantasy league. You finally started to get that production the last 2 weeks. And based on this news, I mean, I'm finding it hard. I just updated my rest of season rankings to see him as anything better than like a third round to a fourth round pick, like in that neighborhood. Now, that doesn't mean I view Davante Adams as like this first round, second round value. Sure. I kind of view him in the same area. Like I think both these guys, maybe it's a hedge, are like that third or fourth round values. Both solid fantasy options. Think T. Higgins, think Devonta Smith, but not that guy who's going to take you to a fantasy championship. So that's my concern. Like Davante Adams, he might be older. He maybe has a hamstring injury or not. Who knows? You can look at some of these separation stats this year and he doesn't rank on those highly. I don't really know if I take that too seriously through 3 games. What are his motivations? How solid are those stats? But with Aaron Rodgers, there's like this unspoken connection between the two of them. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why he's on this team, Aaron Rodgers. You go look at the stats, their last 56 games together, ranging from 2018 to 2022. He's averaging 11 targets per game with Rodgers. Rodgers has been on many of interviews saying there's just this thing in the games that we have. We look at each other. We know what's happening. That's hard to beat out if you're Garrett Wilson, to become that like number one option for Rodgers in key situations. So I do think he's the biggest loser. Now, it doesn't mean he's not startable or you got to get rid of him, but he goes from being somebody you could rely on every week to maybe score 20, 30 points to now it's going to be a little bit more inconsistent.
Yeah, that was my first kind of instinct on this too, is that I think both of these guys become a little bit more like boom bust wide receiver 2 types as opposed to locked in. I don't think either is a locked in wide receiver 1. Garrett Wilson wasn't trending to return fantasy value anyways, right? So that's already kind of the way this season was headed. Now, definitely we'd gotten 2 big results from him the last 2 weeks, but still, I think we were probably trending to him being a little bit of a disappointing first round pick anyways. We're going to knock him down a little bit further here. I'll probably have these guys both as like tier 3 wide receivers, which that's a big ass group for me. Like I think that could go anywhere from wide receiver 8 to like wide receiver 23. That's sort of the range of that bucket of wide receivers. Anyone in that kind of tiering for me is a start every single week. Like we're not going to be, unless your team is absolutely loaded, which it totally could be, but theoretically, you're not benching players in that tier. You're probably not benching a Davante Adams or Garrett Wilson at any point going forward. And look, I mean, I think Wilson and Rodgers, their timing and chemistry has gotten better. I think it was a work in progress, as should be expected. These guys have never played together in a real NFL game for anything more than 4 snaps prior to this season. So that timing and chemistry is improving, but it's definitely not improving with a guy like Mike Williams. Like I think Mike Williams is going to get taken off the field here, and Adams is going to get put in his X receiver role. Wilson wasn't really playing as that X receiver anyway, so I think the way Wilson has been used is probably like we'll continue to see that. If anything, I think some of the like quick hitting stuff that Rodgers and Wilson haven't had that great timing chemistry on, Adams is probably going to get those reads in this offense. So could they be like a Jamar Chase, T Higgins type of duo? I think probably, except we probably won't see one be like a top 5 receiver. They'll be pretty close, I think, rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's the exact way I look at it. And I if this was a different offense, like Rodgers was throwing 40 plus times a game, they were playing at a faster pace, maybe you can see one of them getting to be like a second round value, somebody you feel really confident in every week. But that's just not the case here. Like I think the Jets still want to be able to run the ball first. Who knows with their offensive line if they can do that, but you're going to have that. You're going to have a target share going to Allen Lazard still some, going to the running back. So I think that's probably where I settle in. Both these guys around like a late 3rd, early 4th round value. You said tier 3. For me, that puts them in a range of like Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, and I feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with that too. Yeah, I mean, look, again, I've said on this show a lot that I don't think this Jets offense is a Davante Adams away from salvation. Like I don't really expect them to be in the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl. I don't expect them to meet that conditions of the draft pick. But they're going to be better with him on the field, especially running a lot of these ISO routes and things like that. If you're going to do that type of offense, you do need superior talent at the receiver position. So I expect that to look pretty good there for this Jets offense with him out there. It'll raise the ceiling for this unit, which I think like if you want to do the Garrett Wilson Cope stuff, we'll have less efficient, or we'll have less targets, but we might have more efficiency on those targets, which desperately was needed for Wilson at this point. Let's talk about impact on the Raiders, which, I mean, dude, that Raiders offense looks rough on paper, man.
Yeah. I mean, like the first thing that comes to mind is Brock Bowers just looks more secure. He already was for you, though. Like you're already probably playing him in all your leagues that you ended up drafting him in as a great value. Going to push towards maybe a number 1 tight end overall this year. And the last couple of weeks, he hasn't had Adams, and he's been able to produce and look fine. So, like, I think they can move him around the formation enough that he can't be completely game planned out. But I am still a little bit worried about the rest of the receivers here, mainly Jacoby Myers currently dealing with an injury. Like, in theory, his target share should increase. Other guys like Trey Tucker, DJ Turner, whoever else is there, should see more snaps and routes run. But I don't know how excited I can get about that with the quarterback situation, the overall offense situation. And now also, like, keep in mind, Jacoby Myers will be the focus of the defenses when he wasn't as much when Davante Adams was out there. So last year and the beginning of this year. So I'm a little bit concerned about Jacoby Myers. It could be like maybe a sell high moment if you wanted to say that based on this news on him. I don't feel confident in his projections going forward the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think he'll be, somewhere in that meaningless wide receiver 3 land, basically, for Jacoby Myers. 90.5% of the routes in week 5 before his injury and without Davante Adams. But 9 targets, only 9.4 average depth of target. He's going to need to compile a lot of targets, but Brock Bowers is going to need to compile a lot of targets. But I just don't think there's going to be a ton of fantasy value with this team going forward beyond Brock Bowers. Like, Bowers is a locked in tight end 3. His status is cemented, but we already kind of knew that. All right, so that's the Davante Adams trade. I think it's a pretty as big of a move it is. It's kind of like pretty cut and dry, and the fact that we've seen Rodgers and Adams play together makes it a little easier to project. But with that, let's get into the post week 6, heading into week 7 data dump here.
Yes, science.
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious.
Sal, hit me with your first stat, which I mentioned Nico Collins, the injury ruining my life. You want to talk a little bit about the Texans' target share without Nico Collins?
Yeah, definitely. And I really hope what I'm going to say towards the end of this doesn't make you hate your life even more. But here we go. No. Texans target shares without Nico Collins in the first game. We get Tank Dell leading the way, 31% target share. That's good to see. Dalton Schultz, 28%, Stephon Diggs, 24%, and Joe Mixon, 10%. Those are all the guys at or above 10% of a target share. Kind of the names you would know, like a condensed target share, at least for 1 week, is good to see. Tank Dell was great to see his best performance, 57 yards, 7 catches, and a touchdown. The utilization was good. He had multiple end zone targets, not just red zone, but end zone targets, used all over the field, used in key situations over the middle of the field, both deep and in the red zone. So this is all great. Everything's awesome. We know Nico Collins is out at least 3 more games. So you actually have a valuable asset in Tank Dell here, which hasn't been the case the first month or so of the season. But that piece about Nico Collins, I'm a little bit concerned about this injury, maybe more so than others. Obviously, he's on IR, so he's going to miss 3 more games. That's already a concern, just terrible for people who got a nice value out of him in the second or third round of your drafts. But the piece that I'm more concerned about is this was a re-aggravated hamstring injury, which is I think bare minimum is 4 weeks. You can see this thing push towards 6 weeks. You're already injuring those muscle fibers that were already damaged, and now they're even more damaged. So I'm concerned with that. I think the takeaway here for me, though, is at least for 1 week, we had a very condensed offense. You can start all of these Texans. You probably were anyways, but Dalton Schultz becomes a start. 10-team formats, Tank Dell, in my opinion, becomes a must-start moving forward. And I think it's just something that for Nico Collins owners, obviously not great, but we get some security in knowing the roles of these other guys moving forward.
Yeah, I think Diggs is probably, he's a wide receiver 1 right now in fantasy. I think he's continues to be that. I still will say that Tank Dell doesn't look 100%. He doesn't look like the same explosive player that he was as a rookie. I think that can be true, and he can also be a fantasy starter, as we talked about yesterday on the panic meter. He's still somebody that, with this bump and opportunity, here's the deal: if Nico Collins is out there and he has to kind of walk that tightrope of, I'm not going to be the first read player, I'm not going to lead the team in targets, then we're talking about, oh man, he needs to hit those explosive plays. But if he can compile targets and receptions, he's going to be a fantasy starter with CJ Stroud, who, man, CJ Stroud is, I think, playing. Has he been the best quarterback in the NFL this season? I think it's, I throw out stats and results and things like that. Just if you watch him play, what he's doing and what he has to handle from a burden perspective in that offense, I think you could say he probably is playing the best quarterback right now in the NFL. Lamar Jackson obviously would have a conversation there too, but you're tied to a guy like that. You're playing every single snap. You're running all the routes. Your playing time isn't limited. Even if you're not your best self, you're still a good player. So Tank Dell definitely, I think, is a starter going forward.
Yeah, and Stroud looks composed. A lot of things from his rookie year, just not making mistakes, has everything under control, 2-minute offense, 4-minute offense, whatever it is. And this past week, you got this nice usage out of all those players we mentioned, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Stephon Diggs, and they didn't even have to throw the ball in the second half. They were blowing out the Patriots here. All 3 touchdowns for CJ Stroud came in the first half on short fields as well on one of them. So it can get even better moving forward in terms of overall offensive output. It was guys like Dameon Pierce with touchdowns in the second half. The starters weren't even out there at times in the fourth quarter. So honestly, you can get better from this.
I love it. Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. And, Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, those guys mix in, but I don't think they'll make big dents going forward. Let's stick in the AFC South and move on to your second point about Tony Pollard.
Yeah, Tony Pollard. I kind of want to title this one the good and the bad of Tony Pollard, because a lot of it will be seen as the good, and it should be. He came out of his bye week, and for the second straight game, he had at least a 20-touch game. In this one, he goes for 88 total yards, finds the end zone for the 3rd time this season, and he finishes a top 20 back again, top 10 back, and he's now finished as a top 20 back in 4 of 5 starts. And in this game, Tajay Spears goes down with a hamstring injury. He's now week to week. He's missing at least 1 game. They said it's not as minor, so maybe he'll be back after that. But who knows? Week to week seems like 2+ weeks to me. So everything right now is sky high for Tony Pollard. But I do have one concern. The last 2 or 3 games I've been tracking, Pollard has earned 339 rushing yards this year. 353 of those have come after contact. And that you heard that right. Negative 14 yards before contact for Tony Pollard, which is, part of that is on Tony Pollard, sure. Part of that is loaded boxes because Will Levis isn't striking fear into defenses. And then part of it is his offensive line that, depending on where you look, PFF has ranked as the 24th unit. Some people have him ranked as, or this unit ranked as the 30th unit. Pollard ranks top 10 in average defenders in the box. He's just not having a lot of runways. And we saw earlier in the year A similar situation happened with Ramondre Stevenson. He looked great for 2 weeks. Everything was looking awesome, but all of his yards were after contact. How much can you sustain that? Not only in the early parts of the season, but later on when there's more wear and tear on your body, when it just keeps compiling and the situation at quarterback doesn't seem like it's getting any better right now. It might be Mason Rudolph soon. So that's my concern with Pollard, who has a brutal schedule from like week 8 to 11. So maybe after this week when he faces the Bills, it could be a potential sell spot for him. I'm a little bit concerned about some of these underlying metrics.
Yeah, and you look at the schedule, you mentioned at Buffalo this week, which kind of a bit of a double-edged sword there. You can run on Buffalo, but what if the Bills are putting a big lead on the Tennessee Titans? Will Levis throws a couple picks into that secondary. Could you get game scripted out of that one? So you're already kind of a little bit on a razor's edge there. In Detroit in week 8, I mean, my God, like the alliance, yeah, Sal's like doing the throat there. No, I don't know about that. That's over. And then we've got, Mason Rudolph could be starting that game. Who knows? We've got the Patriots in week 9, the Chargers in week 10, the Vikings in week 11, the Texans in week 12. It's a pretty rough schedule for the Titans going forward.
Yeah, and that's like a big reason for this. Like, I think all of the recent play from Pollard is great. He's an awesome starter for you. You probably view him right now definitely as a top 20 running back, top maybe even 10 rest of the season for many people. The Tajay Spears is like a just gasoline on the fire of like, oh, this is the Tony Pollard backfield. But I am a little bit concerned, like how much can he sustain just doing everything after contact when we're in weeks 10 and 11 and Tajay Spears is back. So I have him in only one league right now that I care about. I'm personally trying to sell him before the Buffalo matchup.
I have him in a league that I care about as well, and I'm going to maybe potentially try to do that too. Who would you rather have rest of the season, Chuba Hubbard or Tony Pollard?
Tony Pollard there. I would have Tony Pollard.
Yeah, it's tough with the Jonathan Brooks activation, and then obviously we've got the specter of Bryce Young, but that may or may not have been a personal question. So that's why I had to ask you. It's a shame too because, dude, I mean, Pollard has looked so good, but I also can't help but remember a conversation I had with him before the Super Bowl where I mentioned a lot. He talked about how he wasn't healthy until week 11. He also talked about just he wasn't necessarily like fully ready to take on the whole workload by himself for an entire year too. So could he be a guy that looks really good to get started here and maybe wears down over the course of the season? I hope not, because he's looked great this year, but we shall see. Let's move to your third point, Drake May and the target share for these Patriots players in the rookie's first start.
Yeah, I was really interested to see what this target share would look like, at least in a one-game sample, and what we could take away from it. And in this game, we got Demario Douglas leading the way with a 30% target share. Hunter Henry, Antonio Gibson, 13%, and Jalen Polk, the rookie, and then Kayshon Boutte with 10% each. Boutte actually played the most snaps on this team, I believe. But the takeaway there for me is, at least for 1 week, Demario Douglas looked like the top option for Drake May. He had 9 targets in this game, was a 30% target share, which is the third time in the past 4 games he's earned at least a 28% target share. Now that's with multiple different quarterbacks, of course, with Jacoby Brissett also out there. And you date back to last year when Demario Douglas was the number 1 receiver on this team the second half of the year with multiple different quarterbacks again, and he's the guy earning targets. So there's something to this that like 4 different quarterbacks continue to target Demario Douglas. And I get it, there's not a ton of competition out there in the wide receiver room and tight end, but there's not going to be the rest of the season. I don't think a trade's on the way here either, or somebody breaking out. So for right now, I think Demario Douglas is somebody that hopefully by the time waivers process, you have him on your team. If not, be sure to pick him up. I'm not going to say he's the most explosive player in and out of his breaks or anything along those lines, but you're getting a guy who's earning targets. We don't even know what the ceiling of Drake May is. For his first game, I thought he looked pretty good. Like, obviously, they get blown out facing, we mentioned CJ Stroud looked great. Okay, that's a tough matchup overall, but I thought he looked composed. I thought the mobility was very nice. I don't think we should underrate that. Keeping plays alive, sustaining drives, creating explosive plays on the run. Those things will help a guy like Demario Douglas. And then you get a matchup this week against the Jaguars. Yeah, you got to go to London. That's not great, but I mean, as good of a matchup as you can find against the Jaguars, I think a pickup in play is definitely in store for Demario Douglas, and he's somebody moving forward, track these target shares, but the dude just keeps earning targets. There's got to be something to that.
Oh, 100%. And, you know, I definitely had some hope for Jalen Polk, but like, man, Gerard Mayo said it, like, you can't just keep not making the most of your opportunities. Like, when you get the ball thrown your way, you got to catch that thing. He is like, throwing to Jalen Polk has been one of the least efficient things any team could do over the NFL or over the course of the season. Like, he ranks towards the bottom of the league in success rate per target. He ranks in the bottom of the league in EPA per target. It's been a losing proposition to throw the ball to Jalen Polk. Meanwhile, on the other end of it, Demario Douglas is like kind of that layup target. I agree with you. I don't know that he's the most explosive player in the world. I've always talked about him. He's a bit of a weird player because he's like a man coverage beating slot receiver, but the Jags play a ton of man coverage, right? So this could be another really good week for him. He feels like the perfect player, Sal, that on a normal week, you'd really rather not be starting Demario Douglas, but we're not about to be in a bunch of normal weeks. We're about to be dealing with a bunch of bye weeks here. So the Bears are on bye. Cowboys are on bye. Certainly some players at the wide receiver position we care about. Douglas could be a guy that potentially, gives you something here. I also come back to think about my guy Josh Downs at UNC with Drake May and Drake May's best season. Now, I don't think Douglas and Downs are similar players as slot receivers, but it's an area where Drake May's comfortable working over the football field, and Douglas, that is obviously his role on this team.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I mean, you just look at this past week, 3 times as many targets as any other receiver. And I know it's just a 1-game sample, but you could take this back to the preseason and training camp. These guys were getting reps together. I mean, it was just like rotating doors depending on the day of which Patriots are now the number 1 receivers on the team. Like all these guys were working with both Brissett and Drake May. So I think if we kind of keep that in mind as well, there's probably some form of a chemistry here between these guys. And it showed this past week. If it shows again in London against Jacksonville, then that's when we start to feel really secure that this guy can be a weekly flex option for sure.
Yeah, I will say really cakewalk matchup here in London in week 7 with the Jaguars. The schedule gets a little tougher after that. We got Jets, Titans, on the road in Tennessee, and on the road in Chicago in week 10 before things soften up with Rams, Dolphins, Colts before they head into a very late week 14 bye. So, yeah, Douglas, but again, a lot of pressure from teams like the Jets and the Titans who are underrated on the defensive line and the Bears who look like one of the best defenses in the NFL. You telling me we're not going to do some PPR scamming with Demario Douglas underneath? I bet we are.
Yeah, and there's just this untapped potential of what Drake May could be. Like, we saw him for 1 game and he looked good, but like, what happens if he actually is like the dude for the Patriots moving forward? And then at that point, you definitely want his number 1 receiver. So I think now's an interesting time to try and get Douglas.
Love it. He was one of my pickups on the waiver wire segment yesterday, so I'm with you on this one. Okay, another group of players we talked about a lot on that show was the Bucs backfield. Sal, I feel like what the hell is going to happen in this Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back room is one of the biggest pressing questions in fantasy right now. So no pressure, buddy, but what are we doing with this backfield?
Yeah, look, no pressure, right? Like, I'm not in the coaching staff meeting, so I could, breaking news, I could tell you I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I can try and read between some of the lines here. Obviously, to this point, you probably already heard, Sean Tucker went off 192 total yards. Absolutely amazing performance for him as somebody who had medical conditions coming out of the draft, led to him not getting drafted, so good for him. Him and Bucky Irving combined for 9 explosive runs of at least 10 yards, both in the receiving and running game in week 6 against the Saints. So far in the season, Rachaad White has just 3 explosive runs on the entire season. Now, again, he's been banged up, but for the most part, we have a long track record now of Rachaad White just not being all that efficient. So far this season, 3.2 yards per carry, 60th in the NFL. He's right around guys like Zamir White, Carson Steele, Alexander Mattison. So now you have him potentially coming back from this foot injury as soon as this week. And the big question comes, like, what are you going to do when you have Bucky Irving, who looks like the best running back on this team, Sean Tucker out of nowhere now, and Rachaad White, who, yeah, the organization, Todd Bowles, this regime, if you will, they did draft him a couple of years back, but they also drafted Bucky Irving. They also signed Sean Tucker and allowed him to make the team. He earned that, but they said, we want this guy on our team the past 2 years in training camp. So all of this in mind, the only thing I can kind of break it down to try and read between the lines, guess what's going to happen here, is going to the offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen. It's a new offensive coordinator. This isn't Dave Canales, who loved Rachaad White last year. It's Liam Cohen, who so far this season hasn't been afraid to just say, we're putting our best players on the field, whether that's Sterling Shepard at the wide receiver position, whether that's Bucky Irving as soon as like week 2 and 3, starting to take the majority of the snaps and touches away from Rachaad White. So if I'm reading between the lines there, Liam Cole might just say, this is Bucky Irving. This is Sean Tucker's backfield now. Rachaad White, you work your way back in. If you can do something, fine, but we're going to give these guys early touches in our next game. And if they go, they go.
Yeah, and like I feel like it could be a situation where, the Bucs say, "Hey, Rachaad White, like let's get you really healthy. You've been banged up, brother. Let's get you real healthy." The only thing I will say though is that they do not have a very appealing run game matchup in week 7. The Commanders had been running the piss out of the ball all year long. Kind of slowed down maybe a little bit against Cleveland in week 5. But week 6, the Ravens absolutely shut down that Commanders ground game. That is who the Bucs play in week 7. You would think you would think, Sal, that if Tampa Bay comes in, I think Tampa Bay has been both one of the best coaching jobs we've seen from an offensive coordinator this year. I think from a design perspective, play calling, player utilization, like check. Like you said, they've thrown their best players out on the field. They've also thrown their players, I think, all in a position to succeed. Love what they've done from the wide receiver position and how they're just saying, hey, yeah, like we're not going to have preconceived notions of these players in the backfield. Like Rachaad White was a 3rd round pick. It's not as if this was a guy they drafted in the top 5 or something like that. Like he can definitely lose his job to one of these guys if they continue to outperform him from a rushing perspective. But again, you would think going to a matchup with this week 7 game against the Ravens, you'd think they just want to throw the ball a lot. Like they would want to attack that secondary, which can be beaten. You have multiple mismatch guys in that passing game. So I don't know. Like part of me even thinks, hey, maybe they want Rachaad White out there from a pass game perspective for this game. I don't know. But he also gets an extra game to get healthy. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, and we're going to find out. And even from that pass game perspective, like Bucky Irving looks solid in that department. Sean Tucker definitely looks solid. And you can say, like, okay, Tucker had a lot of garbage time run. He had like 60 yards and a touchdown on the final drive. They just wanted to just keep feeding this dude. He was going off for long runs. But he was involved early on. He had 62 yards on 3 touches in the first quarter alone. Like, this guy was not just in there for garbage time. Maybe he got a hot hand and they wrote it, but why not when you're putting up 192 total yards? So it's going to be very interesting. I think this is maybe the most appealing spot to watch in all of fantasy, like what happens to this running back position in week 7. The other one would be the Giants backfield. I think that's on my mind too, with Devin Singletary and Tyron Tracy. But since there's 3 guys in this backfield, we really have to pay attention.
Absolutely, really have to pay attention, and that's going to be a fun game to watch on Monday night. I normally like the Monday night doubleheaders, because I have 2 TVs, can set it up pretty well here in the office. I almost kind of wish that was the only game on, just because I want to be really dialed in to that one. But should be a fun game with a lot of like questions to answer in that one overall. Okay, final stat from you here, Sal, has to do with a Washington Commanders wide receiver.
Yeah, this might be a little bit of a sicko one, but I'm starting to.
Let me go ahead and confirm for you, it is a sicko one.
This is the sickest one of the entire season for me, without a doubt so far. It's in a tier of its own. But I'm starting to ask myself, is Noah Brown a viable fantasy wide receiver each week? And before you go, what the hell? Let me talk through this a little bit. So Noah Brown joined this team in week 2. He ended up getting released by the Texans. He ends up coming over or it might have been a trade. I don't even know at this point, so long ago. But week 2, he comes over to this team. He starts to get ramped up a little bit. And by week 4, he's like the number 2 receiver on this team in terms of routes, snaps. Obviously, Terry McLaurin's the one. We know that moving forward for sure. Then he suffers a groin injury, misses week 5. Kind of a minor thing, but it causes him to miss the week. So in week 6, I'm kind of watching this like, okay, I kind of want to see what happens with Noah Brown this week. I was tracking this usage because this is a talented receiver. We saw him in times with Dallas when he was not asked to just like block and be their primary blocking receiver. When he had to fill in for Amari Cooper, who was out for multiple games, he had big weeks. He had multiple touchdown games. Last year with the Texans, Nico Collins is out, back-to-back weeks of 150 plus yards. Later in that season as well with Tank Dell out, finds the end zone, has another top 15 performance. Like this is a talented receiver when he gets usage. So this past week 6, comes back from the groin injury, runs a season high 27 routes, sees a team high 8 targets. He's seeing opportunities downfield in this game. I mean, I'm not going to say that he's like a top 24 receiver the rest of the season. That's not what I'm saying. But he's available in like 95+% of leagues right now. 12-team leagues, I think in bye weeks with multiple flex spots. He's definitely somebody you can put in there. And if we're so high on this Jaden Daniels Commanders offense, which we should be at this point, shouldn't it mean he can sustain 2 weapons, not just Terry McLaurin? People will say Zach Ertz, that's fine. 34-year-old Zach Ertz, you can pick up and add. I'm going to go with the 28-year-old wide receiver who I've seen put up multiple 150-yard games as recent as last year.
That second to last point you made there is the key one, which I had a conversation on Chris Harris's podcast this week. We were talking about this Commanders offense. It's like, we love Jaden Daniels. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, I think, is going to the moon at this point. But is someone else riding the rocket ship, right? Who else is it beyond the running game? Because we know what those guys are there. I definitely think I like the idea of Luke McCaffrey as like a power slot for this team, but we haven't seen that. And he's not really getting a ton of playing time. And he's the guy that I think was a developmental wide receiver anyway. So it might not happen until his second season, if it happens at all. Noah Brown, producer Colin said in the chat that he's like a little bit Alan Lazard-ish, but has a little more juice. I was going to call him like a super, super poor man, maybe a destitute man's Chris Godwin type of player. Big body against zone coverage who is explosive. He was like and Lazard and those guys that's all the same archetype. He was like a special teams player for Dallas. He definitely times was just used as kind of an X receiver for them. But when he moved around a little bit more with Houston, we definitely saw some more appealing sort of play there. So yeah, I don't look. I'm not going to be bullish on Noah Brown or anything like that, but I'm at least intrigued if he can be like a bye week fill in here.
Yeah, look, I said it was a sicko take. That's all I needed. Just some intriguement out of you, maybe some of the audience members as well. But like, here's the thing. As of right now, according to PFF, this is the number 5 overall ranked passing offense. You look at some of the other offenses in the top 10, they're going to be names that you know. The Bengals, the 49ers, Texans, Bucks, Seahawks, Falcons. What do they have? They all have more than one receiving game option, whether it's a tight end or multiple receivers. So I'm just saying, if Jaden Daniels is going to keep this up, keep completing 70+% of his passes, keep looking great both in the short to deep to intermediate parts of the field, somebody else is going to have these big weeks. I'm not saying it's going to be every week, but if you want some 20+ point fantasy weeks a couple times a year, I think Noah Brown's going to do that rest of the season.
How about week 7 against the Carolina Panthers defense? It can't stop anybody.
That's the perfect spot. I was about to say that's the perfect spot.
Yeah, I mean, a couple other rougher matchups for Washington after that. They get Chicago, Giants, Steelers. But we come back around with matchups in the NFC East against the Eagles and Cowboys defenses that could be pretty vulnerable. So we shall see. We need some more sicko takes on this podcast, and we'd love to see that. All right, let's take our first break. When we come back, we'll run through my stats that people need to know heading into week 7 right after this. All right, we're back. I'm only going to have 4 stats here this week because I'm saving my, we'll call it like a little bit of a data dump, talking about real Dorco alignment data stuff with Drake London in that chat at the end of the show. But let's start with the Bills running back usage, Sal. And I did a solo recap of this for the pod yesterday, but you're smarter than me about this stuff, so I want to kind of run by my thoughts on this backfield with you here. Weeks 1 through 5. We saw James Cook take 54.8% of the snaps, 50.4% of the team carries, 42% of the routes. Rookie Ray Davis, 16.5% snaps, 18.7% team carries, 9% of the routes. Ty Johnson, 23% of the snaps, 7% of team carries, about 27% of the routes. Week 6, we know Ray Davis, the rookie, had that dynamic performance against the Jets. 58% of the snaps, 60% of the team carries, 46.7% of the routes. And Ty Johnson's role just didn't really change. About 25% of the snaps, 12% of the carries, and 27% of the routes. So the question here, Sal, is I think it's obvious if James Cook misses time, Ray Davis is a fantasy starter. We know that. I think that's obvious. The question is, what happens when James Cook comes back? Do you think we see anything change with Ray Davis's role? Does this become a bit more of like a Detroit Lions backfield where we have 2 guys? Was Ray Davis's performance good enough? And I know I'm asking you a question that ultimately is an unknowable question. Like we don't know the answer to this, but do you think there's a chance that this performance was so good and again fits so well with what the Bills want to do from a power run game perspective that they can't just go back to giving James Cook 50% of the team carries and 54% of the snaps, that James Cook does get spelled a little bit more by Ray Davis here?
Yeah, I think he will. Like, I think we'll find out for sure, like you were saying, but this is how the Bills want to play. They want to be physical. Like, Ray Davis was not known as this like explosive runner, although we did see that in this game on Monday Night Football coming out. He was just the guy who did like everything right in between the tackles, pass protection, catch passes in the red zone. He's secure. He won't fumble. He's your guy. And we saw all that and more on Monday Night Football. And I do think there's something too, like James Cook has been great this year. He's been efficient per touch. He's been awesome. They're giving him more red zone work. He's scoring more touchdowns for fantasy managers. But there's something too, he's currently hurt. And like they probably don't want him to continue to get hurt. So when he comes back, maybe you take off 15 to 20% of his snaps. You give those to Ray Davis, who is the bigger back. He's around 215 pounds. If he is now this newer version of like Damian Harris or Latavius Murray from last year in the red zone, that would definitely hurt James Cook. That's yet to be seen. But I do think they're probably going to give Davis some work here. And it's really interesting because like if on those first 2 touches, Ray Davis doesn't go for like these 10+ yard runs, maybe it is just a split backfield and this is never a question, but he completely grabbed his opportunity and now you can't take that back. And I do think it's going to lead to, at least in the next game, let's give you some more opportunities and see what you can do with them.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what we said with Jalen Polk, where they're trying to give you opportunity. You literally can't grab and grasp the opportunity. Ray Davis took that and ran. I'm with you that I don't know that was the plan going into the game, but coaches say sometimes like we want to ride the hot hand, and then when somebody really has that hot hand, they're going to go ahead and ride it. So I think with Ray Davis, there is some staying power here. They get the Titans in week 7. Not a great run game matchup. The Titans are 4th in rushing success rate allowed. They've been a really good defense overall. They're one of these defenses, Sal, it's on my radar. Like, when do they just mutiny against the offense because Will Levis is just such a disaster on that side of the ball. But good defense overall, maybe not the best run game matchup. At the same time, though, I could say, hey, you just maybe want some tempo sustaining runs there, which is what Ray Davis gives you, where Cook gives you that more explosive element. I think there's a chance this is a split backfield going forward once James Cook is back. So kind of a bit of an adjustment that needs to be happening there. Seahawks, Dolphins, Colts after the Titans, though. Those are all some really interesting run game matchups there. Let's move on to, hey, could this be the next Detroit Lions running back room? Let's talk the actual Lions running backs here. According to True Media, both Lions running backs rank inside the top 5 in EPA per rush. I mean, they're just absolutely throttling people in the run game right now. But I want to talk about David Montgomery specifically here, who is coming off of an extension. I don't know if you saw, I shared this on Twitter, the Coach Speak Index grade account had something, I think, from their Discord of like Dan Campbell, what he was saying about David Montgomery after that Cowboys win. I was like, dude, this is legitimately, it's a love letter. Like this is not Coach Speak like evaluation stuff. I'm going to pull it up here because it was so striking, some of the things that was that were said. So this is again from Coach Speak Index. This is Dan Campbell on signing David Montgomery to an extension. We didn't see ourselves a year or two from now not having him with us. We didn't see it. It didn't make sense. Quote, he's too much like us. He's too much a part of us. He's everything we're looking for, and we're not just going to let that guy leave. So I'm glad he's here to stay. I wish I could have played with him. He's that type of runner. He's that type of teammate, and it's inspiring. It's inspiring. I love it, man. I love the demeanor. I love the attitude. He won't go down, and he's just resilient, and he's tough. Like I said, that is legitimately... that's a love letter. That's not player evaluation. That is a guy who is in love with this player. I mean, for Dan Campbell to say, I wish I could have played with that guy. That's pretty incredible. Also hilarious, by the way, somebody replied to that tweet when I shared it and said, Dan Campbell's going to hire Dave Montgomery to be his running back coach like that after that guy retires, which is 100% true. So the stats on Dave Montgomery beyond the love letter. Leads the team with 85 touches. He only has 8 fewer targets than Jahmyr Gibbs on the season. He's 10th in yards after contact per attempt, and he's number 2 in rushing success rate among running backs with 40-plus carries on the season. So my question to you, Sal, when will people just respect David Montgomery? When will he just be a set it and forget it starter? And is there a chance that he's the better fantasy back than Jahmyr Gibbs this year? Is that in the range of outcomes?
Yes, it's in the range of outcomes based on how he's being used right now, for sure. Rest of season, I'll take Gibbs, but it's getting closer. And based on where you drafted Montgomery again somehow in the 6th or 7th round of your fantasy drafts for the second straight year, he's paying off for you. Couple of things. First off, we all need somebody like this head coach in our lives to go to bat for us in our contract negotiation season. We need that. I mean, if you can get us $18 million, fantastic. I mean, write a whole love letter. It's perfect. The other thing I'll say is, though, we were seeing this at the start of last year. Now, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs was a rookie. There's a difference there for sure. There's more trust now in Jahmyr Gibbs, another whole year in the offense. But to start last year, David Montgomery, 21 touches, 17, 34 in 25 before getting injured. He then took a couple of weeks off, and he was somewhat limited. Like, you were getting these 15-touch games, but never the same. At the same time, Gibbs, they were ramping him up. Heading into this year, though, we're seeing what we saw last year. David Montgomery continues to go out there, close out games, specific weeks for them in the fourth quarter, in overtime some weeks, and they're just riding this guy right now for 18, 25 touches, 15 touches in close game situations where they're trusting him over Jahmyr Gibbs. Yeah, I think there's something to it. Everything that was just said, everything that you just read off, I think is true. Like, they think he fits perfectly for their offense. And this team just continues to run good. Like, you're talking about an amazing offensive line that continues to stay healthy. For their most part, their running backs are staying healthy. They keep their offensive coordinator. Like, everything just adds up for David Montgomery to continue to look like he did last year before injury.
Man, I mean, I still have goosebumps from reading that, those Dan Campbell. I'm with you. I wish somebody would say that about me. Yeah. I wish somebody would say that about me. I hope somebody's talking like that. Sal, you know what? For you here, for me and you, if any of the execs at Yahoo ever say like, "What's it like working with Sal?" or ask you, "What's it like working with Matt?" I'm going to try to say something as like 90% nice, 90% close to nice.
Replace just our names in that exact same quote. Replace just our names in there.
I wish I could have been potting with Sal my entire career. That's what I'll say. Okay. But on a serious note, yeah, look, I mean, I'm with you that we could see maybe more Gibbs, but like Gibbs has been fine in fantasy. He's running back 13 on the season, despite having already had his bye. He's 15.2 points per game. Maybe not the exact player you wanted when you drafted him if you took him in the first round, but I think he's a fine second. I don't know if we redrafted today, I still think he would be a second round pick. I just think David Montgomery probably should have gone a lot higher. He was a player that I drafted a lot last year. He's a player I drafted a lot this year. And Gibbs, I think, could still be further activated in the passing game. Like I mentioned, Montgomery has 10 targets, 10 catches on 10 targets. Gibbs has 14 catches on 18 targets this year. I still think he could be further used in the pass game. And that's another point to bring up here, too, because I do think we will see this team maybe have to throw the ball a bit more than they have of late. They definitely opened up with what now looks in hindsight like a pretty soft defensive schedule. They got the Rams, the Bucks, the Cardinals, the Seahawks. They took their bye, and then they played that joke of a Cowboys team in week 6. We got Vikings in week 7. That will be one of the most interesting games to watch on Sunday. Obviously, tough defense, both mostly against the pass, so maybe that's another run-heavy one. But that Titans run defense in week 8, Packers in week 9, Houston in week 10, Jaguars in week 11, Colts in week 12. This is a soft schedule actually going forward. So I don't know, maybe the Lions will just continue to pound the rock going forward.
Well, I think the big thing is once they start facing that division, like that division is just good right now. Like defenses are starting to come together for those teams. I think you're going to start to get in situations where more times than they have been right now, Detroit's going to be playing from behind, maybe not just for like the fourth quarter where they have to be in a neutral situation, but maybe an entire second half they're playing from behind. And that's where you get the 7-catch Jahmyr Gibbs games. Like those will balance out as the year goes on. Both guys still great to be having in fantasy, but yeah, everything we've seen so far out of both of them, especially Montgomery, has been awesome.
Number 3 stat for me, Cooper Kupp could return in week 7. He apparently got in a pretty good workout earlier this week. He might be back on the field for the Rams. Kupp still ranks number 1 in first read target share with an outrageous 52% share of the first read targets, according to Fantasy Points data. Obviously, that's a small sample size, but I mean, that might look the same when he gets back out there on the field. And despite facing an absurd amount of injuries, the Rams are still 3rd in offensive success rate overall. They're number 1 in rushing success rate, and they're 11th in dropback success rate. The Rams' next 4 games: Raiders, Vikings, at Seahawks, Dolphins. Puka Nacua might not be too far off from a return as well, though he's not going to play this week. He might at the earliest come back in week 8. So, Sal, I mean, Cooper Kupp, if he's back, he just moonwalks right back into your number 1 receiver spot. Is that kind of the way we're looking at this?
I would say weekly rankings, like a top 12 receiver, number 1 overall. I don't know. Maybe that. Yeah, maybe like that specific week, if it is this week, week 7, because the competition at this point, I mean, yeah, you're getting some usable weeks out of Tutu Atwell, Jordan Whittington, but for the most part, these guys are just patch-up players for when Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp come back. And yeah, I think Kupp, you just mentioned the first read target share. As long as Nacua is out, hopefully you get like 2 or 3 games instead of just 1 with that situation. He's great. He's a top 10 wide receiver, top 5 probably in those weeks. You can expect a ton of targets out of the slot in some of these matchups. Really good. Majority of them really good matchups for him. But I'm still just overall, let's say, concerned about the health situation. Like when he comes back, I think he'll be as good as he can be. They're not going to force him back at this point. And then you get Cooper Kupp coming back just like 1 or 2 weeks after that. So It's a situation where we had at the start of the season. It's not the same as when Puka first went down, and now it's like, oh, Kupp looks like the real deal for the next 2 months. It's kind of right back to those guys splitting. So like rest of season, I'm actually not that high on Kupp, even though he's trending to come back. I still have him below wide receivers like as of right now, like Brian Thomas Jr., which might sound crazy to people. Terry McLaurin. I'm really high on Brian Thomas. That's why. Terry McLaurin. He's in that like Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
He's in that range for me just because we know Puka is also close to returning.
I think that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, Puka's coming back. I also think like they have gotten good play out of Jordan Whittington, who leads all wide receivers in success rate on his targets this year. Like that is thrown to Jordan Whittington has been a good play. And number 5 is Tutu Atwell. Those guys might not be as good as individual players, and obviously that's not a wide receiver only stat. That is that's a Matthew Stafford stat as well. The fact that those guys are both in the top 5, but that's why we're interested in this, because this is still a pretty good ecosystem. I maintain, and again, people got super annoyed with me after I said this in week 1, you can't throw 20 passes to Cooper Kupp because number 1, it's not good for your offense. You need other options. And number 2, you're going to get the guy hurt. And that's exactly what happened. So I think the fact that we have some of these other options that can be good for the overall offense, even if it doesn't mean that like the fantasy hardos who want Cooper Kupp to just get the ball as much as possible and take those victory laps. Like I think that's crazy. So you might be a little bit lower on Kupp than I am once he gets back, but I haven't really sat down and thought about rest of season rankings yet. So I feel like that tier 3 zone is definitely kind of the right area.
Yeah, and what we do know to this point, of course there's injuries, but the Rams defense, run defense secondary hasn't been great. So like they're going to be in situations where they have to play from behind, which only helps Cooper Kupp, of course, to have these 10 to 12 plus target games.
All right. Okay. Before we move on, would you rather have, and I know this is a weird one because one guy's on IR and one guy's about to come back from injury. Would you rather have Nico Collins or Cooper Kupp rest of the season if you could do that trade?
Yeah, right now, Nico Collins for sure.
I'm with you on that one, even if we are concerned about that hamstring injury. All right, final stat from me. Like I said, I'm saving my 5th one for the Drake London conversation. Number 4, Russell Wilson's likely to be named the starter in Pittsburgh in Week 7, according to Tom Pelissero. But do we care? I think the interesting part of this is George Pickens, 150 of his air yards have been on, quote, uncatchable passes because of an inaccurate throw, according to fantasy points data. That's 9 targets overall. I know that might be like, oh, man, yeah, maybe Russell Wilson can help George Pickens. That's only 19th out of all pass catchers in terms of the uncatchable, inaccurate air yards. And it's only 27% of his total air yards and 21% of his total targets. I maintain that like a lot of this George Pickens stuff is, yeah, like Arthur Smith's got to be, he should be playing him more, should be featured more, all this sort of stuff. But Pickens has also not been, like we talk about a guy who's rumored to be one of the best contested catch receivers. This stat from John Ledyard, who I've had a lot of conversations about George Pickens with John over the years. He says that, notes in this stat, George Pickens in contested situations in 2022, his rookie year, 19 of 28, which is great. In 2023 and 2024, 11 of 36. So a little bit more like rumored to be a great ball winner than he actually is a great ball winner. So I think, again, some of these are plays that George Pickens is leaving on the field. I don't know, man. Do we care about this Russell Wilson starting in Pittsburgh at all from a fantasy sense?
So overall large scale, no, probably not. Specific to George Pickens, I actually thought he was an interesting buy low candidate heading into this week. I get this news and I have to reconsider some things because it's kind of this double-edged sword. Like if Justin Fields isn't out there, well, his 5 rushing touchdowns aren't a thing this year, and it means a wide receiver, a tight end, somebody's going to have to catch those. But True. Then there's also the case that, are they even down there? Like, he's sustaining drives with his legs. He's keeping plays alive. Like, he's actually making plays downfield at times, Justin Fields, this season. So I think my takeaway here is if Russell Wilson can just give us, like, QB 20 to QB 24 play, I actually like this more for George Pickens' overall ceiling, assuming it's not like Deshaun Watson level play for him.
Right.
If that's the case, I like it. And I really like it for the running backs because of what I just said. You're not going to have Justin Fields taking off and running and not checking down to your running backs. You're not going to have him taking 5 touchdowns through 6 starts on the ground this year. So Najee Harris off a big game. A lot of people are going to probably say sell high, and that might be the right answer, but I think this actually helps him.
Coming off their best performance from a run game perspective of the season too, is this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. So, you know, Zach Frazier, their star rookie center who's been so good, he avoided a serious injury. Hopefully they can get some of these guys on the offensive line back because I think that will really help the run game. And, you know, I've definitely rolled my eyes at some of the Russell Wilson stuff, but I think it's been also clear like why Justin Fields is not a starting quarterback in the league. You know, and I don't think Russell Wilson's like a solution either. I think it was been clear all along, like both guys are going to make starts all year long, and I don't think either one of them is a real fix for the Steelers. But I can see how they might be able to run more of like a normal offense, like just a safe, boring, conservative offense with Russell Wilson more so than Fields. The key will just be George Pickens from, you know, obviously an effort perspective and an individual play perspective, but also how are they going to use him? Will it be any different of a route tree with Russell Wilson? Because I've always thought Pickens is best deep down the field and on outside breaking routes, and that's what Fields likes to throw. That's used to be what Russell Wilson likes to do. Is he still kind of operating that way? I don't know. I guess we'll see. I tend to not think it moves the needle much, but you're right that just taking touchdowns away from the quarterback as a scrambler will open up some opportunities for other players here.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we're just going to put our George Pickens faith and future in the hands of Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith. What could go wrong? What
could possibly go wrong? Absolutely nothing. Okay, what will go right is Sal's moves to make. These are guaranteed to always work. That's his guarantee to the people out there. We've got 2 for you here today, Sal. So let's go right into your moves to make, starting with a certain Vikings running back.
Yeah, I want to buy low on Aaron Jones right now. The situation for Jones the last few weeks hasn't been great if you're one of his fantasy managers. Maybe that has those people frustrated. He's left back-to-back games early. The first one in week 4, he came back in. Week 5, he didn't return with the hip injury, then gets ruled week to week. Now, it was kind of a convenient time for him at least because he went on the bye in week 6. But heading into this week, he's kind of like, at least at this point, 50-50 on if he'll play. We'll get the practice reports throughout the week. But honestly, whether he plays or not, he's facing the Lions. It could be a stinker for Aaron Jones. He maybe is limited. I'm trying to buy low on him right now because before this injury, and it doesn't seem like it's a serious one, once he's back, I think he's probably back. He was a top 5 running back in fantasy and the NFL. You look at success rate. You look at his 18.6 PPR points per game. You look at his overall usage, averaging 20 opportunities per game. Like Ty Chandler was involved for like a week or two, then he just wasn't because this was Aaron Jones' backfield. Behind a good offensive line, in a solid offense. And I think if you can get that guy on your team and he misses like a game, maybe 2 at most for you, you're in a situation where you're 3-3, 4-2, and you can make this deal happen. That's something I just want to do right now. I mean, this is a guy who has dream matchups coming up. Week 8 to 10, the Rams, the Colts, the Jaguars. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. I almost hope he plays in week 7, so there's no injury concern, and puts up a stinker, and now somebody really wants them off their team. But for right now, I think buying low on Aaron Jones, who rest of season is like right around the top 10 running back with all the other injuries going on, I think that's appealing.
Yeah, I was going to mention that schedule too. That is great. And it even, goes further, like week 13, week 14 against the Falcons and the Cardinals. So there's a lot of potential really good spots here. The Vikings are coming off their bye. They're so well coached on both sides of the ball. The NFC North in general is just like that's going to be a slog of a division. A lot of great teams there, a lot of potential high scoring games. I like the call on Aaron Jones as a buy low, but that is not the only running back you're advising people to trade for heading into week 7.
Yeah, I think it's time we start to remember the name Isaiah Pacheco because it's getting pretty close to this guy's return date. Depending on where you look, and we don't have a solid report on this now, but it's anywhere from like a week 9 to 12 return date. Some people are saying week 10 feels pretty good. And you look up and it's already week 7. Like we're less than a month away from that for Isaiah Pacheco, who in week 1 saw 80% of the snaps, was involved everywhere. Some concern around Samaje Perine taking away his pass catching usage. Like that's how far we are into the season already. That was a concern at that point. And that just didn't happen. Now, of course, Pacheco is going to come back, probably be ramped up a couple of weeks. But again, if you're in one of these situations where honestly, even if you're 2-4 and you can kind of just get by, you think you have a decent team, but definitely 3-3 or a winning record in fantasy, why not trade for Pacheco, who could be back as soon as 2 to 3 weeks from now? We know once he's back, like it's his backfield over Kareem Hunt. Maybe they split it for a week or 2 and get him full back up to speed. But this is a guy that I truly believe can be a league winner for you. When you're in your fantasy championships or playoffs in weeks, 13, 14, 15, this could be a guy seeing 20 plus touches per game in a Patrick Mahomes offense that will be getting to the red zone.
Man, yeah. God, the Samaje Perine stock down for Isaiah Pacheco conversations thankfully feel like a whole other lifetime ago, because that was quite a thing that we had to talk about it at some point. But yeah, I love this call. He had 5 catches on 5 targets in week 1. He looked like he was going to be more involved in the passing game. His usage as a receiver has kind of steadily trended up throughout the course of his time there. He's clearly a circle of trust player. And I don't think they'll continue to use, I think Kareem Hunt is there just to fill in for Pacheco. I don't think he's going to be spelling Pacheco once he gets back there. So I love this call. I love both of these moves. These are 2 running backs I would love to have on my fantasy teams. So I'm going to consider maybe making some of these trades as well. Sal, appreciate you, buddy. We'll say goodbye to you here. Tell the people what you got working on the website this week.
Yeah, by the time you're listening to this, the Wednesday trades piece, more trade targets, not just these 2 running backs, will be on there for you. Thursday will be the matchups to exploit across all positions. And then Friday, we'll get into it on the key findings for the week. Basically everything you need to know, usage stats, what coaches are saying, whatever it might be, 10 key findings that can help you win your matchup.
Boom. Super useful content coming from Sal Vetri on all of the Yahoo spaces. We're going to take our final break here. After the break, you'll hear my conversation with Falcons wide receiver Drake London right after this. Here on behalf of DirecTV for Business, joining us now on the pod is a player I've been a big fan of for a long time, Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Drake London. Drake, what's going on, buddy? Thank you for being here.
Appreciate you. How you doing, man? You good?
I mean, I'm doing good. You guys are probably doing pretty good over there. Big last couple games for you guys there over with the Atlanta Falcons, man. The offense is really, I feel like, kind of clicking right now after maybe a bit of a slow start. Can you kind of tell me what's gone into maybe that progression here?
It's as simple as just getting time together as an offense, understanding each other, what we're best at as individuals, going out there and executing.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a key word there, which is time together, because something that, and on the media side, we can be very reactionary, right? I'm sure you've seen this stuff with your time in the league and everything. We get caught up in these 1 week samples, things like that. And something that I talked about with Atlanta is that this is a team that it's a new quarterback, it's a new head coach, it's a new offensive play caller. And do you guys on the inside sort of feel like, hey, like give us a little bit of time to kind of coalesce here, especially with the lack of preseason and how things have changed in the league like that?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that we have fully clicked to our full potential yet. And we've already done some great things, so I think it's time for us to put it all together. And again, it's going to take time. So we just keep on pushing and keep on going down the right track.
So you mentioned using guys kind of in figuring out where your strengths lie. I mentioned at the top, I've been a big fan of your game for a while. My specialty is actually wide receiver game film, charting routes. I've been focused on your game basically since back to USC. And I remember thinking, watching you at USC, man, this guy would be so good as kind of what I like to call like a power slot receiver. Not a guy who moves fully inside, but you're a big guy, you can block in the run game, and you can win on these like quick hitting routes. And, this is no disrespect to anybody that was there with the team in your first 2 years, but I felt like so many snaps were just kind of out on the boundary as that X receiver. And then when I see the Falcons hire, Raheem Morris and then hire Zach Robinson as the offensive coordinator, it clicks to me like, man, this is a guy that can really fit well with how those Rams receivers like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp have been used. And right away in week one, even if the results weren't there from a statistical perspective, your snaps in the slot were way up, off the line deployment, motion at the snap. How has that been basically the plan kind of for you, basically since those guys have got there? And when did that sort of kind of come together for you?
Yeah, pretty much when they got there, they let me know that I'll be switching sides. I want to be predominantly the X receiver of Z, so a lot more movie parts and stuff like that. And then I think too that going back to my USC days, the way I got onto the field as a freshman was to play in that slot. And with my basketball background, I think I reached spatial awareness. And I think that they keyed in on Z-Rock, Raheem, and took note of that. And anywhere that I could play to help the team, honestly, I'm going to do it.
For people that may not be like big time wide receiver film dorks or anything like that, can you just tell like the listeners, what are some of the advantages for a wide receiver? What do you like about playing in that Z position or in the slot and kind of being in the mix there?
You just get a lot of mismatches, especially too in this offense. There's a lot of moving parts. I'm moving a lot from one side of the field to the other. I could be inserting. I could be doing little things like that. So it just keeps the defense on its toes. You can't really have a guy that travels with me all game. So we get the looks that we want. It makes playing football fun and easy.
Yeah, I said on the pod a couple of episodes ago, after seeing, especially that Thursday night game against Tampa, I basically was like, this guy's going to lead the NFL in catches, Drake London. I think in this role with your skill set, and I know you're not going to come on here and like pump your own chest up and everything like that, but I think you could really do that this year because that type of role and with the offense clicking, I think it's just so perfect for your skill set. So it's been super exciting to watch. People I think can really ratchet up their expectations here for you in year 3 because, like I said, I just think it's a perfect role for what you do well.
Yeah, I think the same as well. And hopefully that's the case. Kind of strive for greatness in sport. It's kind of hard to do that, but if I can do it, then
well, there's so many damn good wide receivers in the league these days, man. It's like every year we get guys that come out here and the first round picks or even deeper into the draft. So it's hard to stand out, but I think deployment and especially chemistry and timing with your quarterback, really, that's how you can take what's a great individual player and reach those statistical accolades. So let's talk about Kirk Cousins, new quarterback this year. What has it been like sort of getting the timing and rhythm and chemistry down with him, a guy who's played in this league and basically seen it and been there and done that?
Yeah, exactly. He's been there, seen it, done pretty much every situation that you could think of. And to have that and have him have that in his back pocket, that knowledge, is really, really great, especially me being a young player. We've learned a lot from him. That's 13 years in the league of just straight knowledge.
Yeah, I could not believe, again, I hate to call people out on the show here, but I could not believe, Tampa Bay just throwing all these soft zone coverages behind blitzes on Thursday night. I'm like, Kirk is going to eat this up. He's seen all these coverage looks. And again, being able to see a guy like you activated from that is pretty exciting for us on the outside. You mentioned Darnell Mooney. I will say one thing that has taken me by surprise this year is just how productive he's been in this offense. Can you kind of give the people a little bit of a scouting report on Darnell Mooney and sort of what he's brought to this team?
Just straight explosiveness. It makes Kirk's job a lot easier. And so he's just a great guy off the field.
Yeah, you guys have really worked in concert together. I feel like some of these dagger concepts where you're running those in-breaking routes and he's clearing space, it's worked well for you. Although I will say, man, Kirk Cousins throwing the clear out route to Darnell Mooney on the dagger for that touchdown on Thursday Night Football. That's one of those things that on paper, you're probably not supposed to do that. But again, if a guy like Kirk likes to look, he can let it rip.
Exactly. And then too, that just goes to a point of Mooney. Like he went up there and attacked the ball in between three people. To see that is really, really cool. And then too, Kirk sees it, he's going to let it rip. That's what we love about him.
Hey, Bijan Robinson, obviously great player for you guys as well. I remember a conversation I had with him at the Super Bowl right after Raheem Morris gets hired there. And he said he got off the phone with Raheem Morris thinking that is the best conversation I've had with a coach in my entire time playing football. And that really took me by surprise, right? I thought that was, not that I was not expecting that from Raheem Morris, who I have a lot of respect for, but just it's a big statement. Can you tell me a little bit about what Raheem has brought to this team and sort of the vibes around Atlanta overall?
He's just instilled confidence in us. I got to meet with him in person out in Cali during offseason, and I could piggyback off of what Bijan said. He's just that guy, little players coach, and that's why we love him.
Yeah, and again, to speak to the vibes there, I would say just from the outside perspective, after that overtime win on Thursday night against the Bucks, seeing, you run out of the stadium saying like, that's Kirk O'Chains, man, like that, it seems pretty cool. And like you guys are all sort of coalescing there.
Yeah. This team, I love this team. Guys have seen it. The best thing about it is that none of us have ego. If we get the win, everybody's going to be smiling and we're all going to be happy for whoever went offset.
Last couple things here before I let you go. We've talked a lot of positives. We've talked a lot about the things that have gone well. But like you said, work's not done. You're still kind of trying to figure it out. From your perspective individually, just on your game, what can you do to sort of kind of take that next step in your career here in year 3?
I think being a better route runner, being somebody who go up and attack the ball deep down the field, and just capitalizing on those big plays when we need it.
Last thing here for the people who again aren't maybe like wide receiver film dorks and things like that, what's something about playing the position, especially at the pro level, that maybe people on the outside don't know?
Ooh, that's a good one. But I would say in my eyes that a lot of people don't know that the blocking role of a wide receiver is what makes him grow. I think that's a lost art in this game right now. If people worry about catching one thing, I think that's just plays a huge role in our offense and most plays in general.
I gotta say for the listeners in the audience, like I did not slip Drake like a $20 bill to say that, because I say it all the time. People hate when I talk about wide receiver blocking, but it really matters. Not only does it, from a fantasy football perspective, you want your running backs ripping off these big runs. The wide receivers got to block their ass off. That young wide receiver sleeper you want to get on the field, they gotta show on the film that they're blocking, they're grinding in the run game. So that's a great answer.
Yes, sir. No block, no rock.
100%. Hey man, really appreciate your time here. Thank you so much, and good luck the rest of the season.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
That's going to do it for us today. Shout out to both Sal Vetri and Drake London for joining the show. Great stuff from both of those guys. We'll be back tomorrow on Thursday in the Fantasy Film Room with Nate Tice. We're also going to preview Thursday Night Football, Broncos, Saints. Oh, boy. What a matchup. Just what's the over-under on that game? I can't wait to talk about taking the under on it with Nate Tice tomorrow. Until then, we are out.